What is a thunder lizard? Our next guest, Mike Maples, describes it as the tiny number of really exceptional companies that are truly disruptive. But how do you find one? And more importantly, what do you do once you spotted it? Here to tell us more in conversation with Fast Company's Leah Hunter, the founding partner of Floodgate Capital, Mike Maples.
I'm going here.
Okay, I'll take this.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last day. And thank you, Mike, for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so obvious question to start it. Why thunder lizards and what does that mean?
Okay, so I've been using this term thunder lizard for about 25 years now. The metaphor comes from Godzilla. So Godzilla was hatched from radioactive atomic eggs, swam across the ocean, growing as he swam, and emerged with an attitude, and then decided to start swiping holes in buildings and start breathing fire on things and eating train cars like they were sausage links. And that always just struck me as an apt metaphor for these 0.1% companies that just emerge from nowhere and rewrite the rules of the industry. So that's kind of what I'm in it for, and I invest either too early or way too early, so I need to spot these when they're atomic eggs before they've hatched.
Well, okay. So if you're spotting companies as eggs, the founders have to decide like what they're going to grow into. And I imagine, how many founders do we have in the audience or entrepreneurs? Cool, that's a fair percentage. We'll go here. So how would a founder know if their idea is going to grow into something big, a thunder lizard or just something huge?
Yeah, and this may resonate with some of the folks here, but I've spent a lot of time with some of the folks who came up with the idea of lean startups and customer development. And at a meta point of view, they argue that you should have a value hypothesis before you have a growth hypothesis. But the challenge is, how do you know that what you're building is going to be big someday? Because you could have product market fit, but you could have it at a local maximum. And so while those techniques are valuable for building products, I got interested in the question of how do you figure out if it's a big enough idea in the first place? And so I started to work on a set of ideas that I call having an insight hypothesis. And so what I'm looking for are a set of force multipliers that are by themselves exponential but additive in different ways. And if those attributes are present in a startup, I feel better about the chance of it breaking out.
Well, what are some of those?
Yeah, so one of my favorite questions is, what's the earned secret? So most of the great startups that I've seen are non-consensus and right. So if you do something that's right but obvious, you end up attracting a lot of competitors. And so the earned secret usually happens when someone's in a field that they're passionate about for their own sake. And then because they're living in the future, they discover something that's not obvious to other people. One of my favorite examples, and it's a woulda, coulda, shoulda example, Brian Chesky at Airbnb. So Brian didn't have enough money to go to a design conference in town, and so he advertised an air mattress in his apartment on Airbnb, or not on Airbnb, just on Craigslist, and he gets 400 people wanting that. And that's completely counter to what I would have thought in a world where you had the Craigslist killer and all this stuff. And so Brian had a profound insight before a lot of other people did, and he kind of pulled the thread on that and studied the problem and fell in love with the problem before he did Airbnb. So I really like these founders who noticing is the right term, I think. Very few great startups I've seen start when somebody says, hey, I want to start a company now, let's come up with ideas. It's almost always noticing something while you're living in the future. And then the leap of faith is, how big could that be? So that's one way.
Well, we were also talking in the back about how great startups avoid the trap of mindless competition, and there's another way to do that you call the flippening?
Yeah, so this is another
that?
one of my technical terms. I call it the flippening. So It turns out that when you're a startup, you want incumbents to have a disincentive to retaliate against you. And one way that you do that is you sell to a customer they don't care about. But another way that you do that is you have a value delivery system that's different from theirs. So for example, if the incumbent in an enterprise is selling by the seat, you're better off selling by the transaction or by some other variable, because it's disorienting for an incumbent to change their pricing model to come back after you. Or if the incumbent distributes with direct sales, you may want to have a different go-to-market strategy. So what I call the flippening is the thought experiment of take the big companies, think about their value chain or their value delivery system, their processes, how they do products, how they price, and run the thought experiment of what would I build if I was going to do the opposite of what the incumbents do. And the more links in that value chain that you flip, the more disorienting you are when you come to market, because the incumbents struggle to figure out how to make sense of what you're doing and how to retaliate. It's very hard for Microsoft to go from being a desktop company to an internet company, which is why they had a hard time competing against Google, even though they had all the money in the world. So that's, the flippening is about, think about how companies deliver value and see if you can do the opposite when you go to market.
And you put yourself in an entirely different pool, right?
Exactly. So, we like to say, why does the flippening matter? Every company operates in a value network. And if you choose to operate in an incumbent's value network, you can get faster traction some of the times, but the incumbent will co-opt you. So an example I like is JetBlue. As soon as they got traction, because they're going through the Dallas-Fort Worth hub, American Airlines lobbies the local government and make sure that JetBlue has the crummy gates compared to American Airlines. Yeah. And so they'll try to do a lot of things to leverage their incumbent network against you, whereas Southwest Airlines flies out of totally different cities. They fly out of Dallas Love Field or other places. That takes longer to get started, but once you have it going, the incumbents can't really attack you as easily because you've created your own separate value network. And so, I'm a big fan of businesses that create their own value networks that grow over time.
Bringing up the Texan examples with the Austin accent.
I got a home team. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've heard one of the ways that you make choices is the what is your why now? You ask people that, and you ask founders to think about that. What does that mean?
Yeah. So one interesting way to think about the world is that almost every startup idea has been tried. And I'm not, when I was a founder, I was never arrogant enough to believe I was the first person in history to ever have an idea. And so then you kind of ask, okay, well, why hasn't it ever worked before or gotten big before? And a bad answer to that question is, I'm awesome and nobody else has been. It may be the right answer, but it's not my favorite answer. So if you look at, say, Lyft couldn't have happened until the GPS chips in smartphones were good enough to locate a car within a block.
Right.
And so, if Lyft starts a couple years earlier, service isn't good enough. YouTube benefited greatly from the fact that phones started having cameras and USB connections. And so almost every startup I've seen that ends up being truly great does have a why now, where it could be a combination of adoption, i.e. everybody has smartphones now, or it could be the technology that's exponentially improving finally got good enough, and now a mainstream product can be built. But I often find that if you're an entrepreneur trying to think of your own company, it's just a useful thought experiment. Forget about VCs. It's just a useful way to think about the disruptive power of your idea. And so, the why now kind of answers what wave am I surfing on? And the surfing, it's kind of like the gathering forces of the ocean are underneath you. And it's more powerful than just you.
Well, it's also a question that you're going to get if you approach any media, because an editor is going to ask that exact question.
Yeah.
Why should I cover this right now? How does it tie to a trend in the market, or what's different about it?
Right.
I always want to make sure that everyone walks out with useful advice, something that they can put into practice. So what are one or two pieces of advice that you would give to the founders in this audience?
Okay, so the first piece of advice would be that life goes by way faster than we all realize, and try to avoid the trap of just doing a startup. So a lot of people in this world are looking for it, but they're not chasing it right now. They're thinking that they'll find it someday. And the best founders that I've worked with think this is it. The startup they're doing right now is it. It is the best thing they ever intend to do. And the founders that I've worked with, their teams thought they were doing the best work of their career right then and there. And so I think that would be the first thing, would be greatness is a decision. It's not a destiny you hope for. It's not something that you hope works out. It's something that you count on and be intentional about every day. So I'd say that's the first thing.
Well, and when we were talking in the speakers lounge, you also said something about passion, and if this were the only...
Yeah, so it's sort of like obsession almost. It's a little bit politically incorrect, but there's a story I like about Bill Gates, who I think is probably the best founder of my lifetime that I've seen back in the day. But there's a story where somebody's writing an article about Microsoft, and they're going back to the airport. It's probably the last time Bill Gates ever gave anybody a ride in a car, but it was like the late 80s. And there's not a radio in his car. And so the reporter says, hey, well, what's up with this missing radio in your car? Did you get ripped off? And Bill says, no, I figure if I have a radio in my car, I'll be tempted to turn it on. And if I turn it on, I won't be thinking about Microsoft. And so, like a lot of the folks that I've worked with who have been great have just been, it's not just that they want their business to succeed, they're in a field that they have this authentic passion about, and they're just like obsessed with like pushing the envelope of that field all the way, and they just almost can't think of anything else because they're just so excited about that. So there's passion can be misdirected, but like obsession in a field where you develop a set of earned secrets, I think, is inherent to some of the really great folks I've seen.
And I also love the idea of, if this is the only startup you get to start for the rest of your life,
yeah,
is this the one that you would do?
Yeah, I mean, I love how in the S1, Logan and John said, Lyft is our life's work, because that's what it ought to be, right? I think every day is a gift. We don't have much time, and the best way that we can offer our gift to the world is to do things that we think are truly great, and to decide to do those things and not just kind of wing it and hope for the best. And we talked about Alex Honnold, right, in the break room. Like, Alex Honnold climbed Yosemite El Cap without a rope, 3,500 feet straight up. And you don't hack your way up Yosemite El Cap. You climb it 200 times with a rope, and you do pull-ups in a van with your fingers, and you decide to prepare to do something great. And I've just found time and again the great founders, because it's their life work, failure is not an option. They've just decided it's going to happen. They would do it even if they couldn't raise the money, because they're doing this.
Stage yesterday with Terrell Owens, and he was talking about something similar, like the way that he trained, or the way in that moment he had an injury, the way he trained to heal himself, and it was just like, failure's not an option. I'm doing this, and it is happening, which I think is wonderful. There's something else that people would not get from watching another interview with you. We were talking about how you think about lean startups, which will help you iterate faster, but that they don't help you understand if your insight is good.
Yeah, that's right. So I basically believe that, and by the way, I'm a big fan of Eric Ries and Steve Blank and Andy Radcliffe. I think lean startups are a great technique for taking the waste out of product development and locking on to value proposition quickly. So, lean startups are basically, if I had to reduce it to a thought, it's prove your value hypothesis before you prove your growth hypothesis. And while you're proving your value hypothesis, you develop customers in parallel with a product. And I've spent a lot of time getting interested in what can I learn from the founders that were great that could help founders think about whether I'm doing something big enough in the first place. And so I call that the insight hypothesis. And so I believe that founders should have an insight hypothesis before they go execute their lean startup strategies. And I think the insight hypothesis combines what's my earned secret, what's my why now, what is the unserved customer that I'm delighting, who's desperate and with their hair on fire, and then how am I going to go to market in a way that disorients the incumbents. And I think if you can get all four of those things right, then you've kind of put yourself on a playing field where you have a chance to really be exponentially large if the value proposition takes hold.
I love that. Okay, so since we're talking thunder lizards, will you give us a few examples of thunder lizard players, whether those are companies, I mean, you mentioned Bill Gates, but companies, technologies, or ideas, places where people would be able to spot them or where they should be looking to grow, where there's growth opportunity?
Yeah, so it's funny, and this may be too broad of an answer, but I think that thunder lizards is one form of describing what I like to call the prime movers of the world. And prime movers don't think the future is random, don't hope for the best outcome. Prime movers, Elon Musk didn't discover the electric car market. He helped us learn how to think about it. He taught us. So did Steve Jobs with smartphones and tablets. But you don't just have to be a prime mover, an entrepreneur to be a prime mover. You might have a dream like MLK had, or you might have a recipe like Thomas Keller, or you might have a song like Elvis Presley. But people actualizing their gift as gratitude for the time they have is the main thing that I like to emphasize to people. And if you're not doing that, you don't have much time, and so honor the gift of your time by doing the things that you think are great that allow you to offer your gifts in the most profound way possible. Is kind of the advice I would offer.
God, I love that. I mean, it speaks to the idea not just of passion, which you spoke about earlier, but of absolute authenticity to yourself.
Right.
Right? Because everyone is unique, and it's your differences that make you powerful. But it requires having the strength to embrace those, own them, and follow those when much of the herd may be going this way.
Exactly, and it has to do with like my number one advice to founders when they pitch a VC is help them understand your authentic truth so that they'll follow you. Because if you try to outguess what they're looking for, you'll get advice from 10 different advisors, and it'll be like trying to figure out how to do a golf swing, right? You'll be doing like 30 things at once, and you have 50 slides to overcome every possible objection, where the right answer is find the person who believes your secret and wants to be in on the secret with you. That's all who really matters. It's like the people who believe what you believe, who want to go to battle with you and make your truth happen in this world. And so that's I think that's just true across the board in life is, you want to listen to contrarian insights and people have different ideas than you that are rendered from an intelligent perspective. But in the end, it's your life, and it's kind of your authentic opportunity to pursue it and offer gratitude for it by pursuing it well.
Perfect ending. May everyone here find that for themselves. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.